Today, I am making the decision to let go of all things that take away my peace. I will let go with love and gentleness.
Okay, so this chapter starts with an image describing someone holding on for dear life. And so why can it be so incredibly difficult to let go of something or someone?
Well, it's your ego that's holding on. It loves to replay things and hold on just out of habit. You know, it's what the ego does. The soul, our soul, it holds nothing. And it's only the mind that hangs on. And the problem and the reason why that, letting go is such a huge topic is that a great deal of us are stuck in our mind. Thus, it's hard to let go because what you're hanging on to lives in your mind. It doesn't live in your soul. It's generally not living in the moment you're in. It has very little or if not nothing to do with the moment you're in. You could say most of everything that you're hanging on to has to do with what you want for the future or what you're trying to drag from the past into this current moment. And we can't drag the past into the moment, and we can't drag the future into this moment either. We have to accept what is in this moment, but this moment goes backwards and forwards. But we have to keep moving with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it can be a real challenge to let go of something. Though the whole concept of letting go, where it may seem like a defeatist mentality to let go of something, like, well, my work with this isn't done yet. We have a way in creating values for things that may not even be real, or we're interpreting what the value of something is before we've received it, and then we can actually see it in front of us and see what it was actually worth.
And it may not be worth much.
That's exactly right. It might not be worth anything. And if anything, it could be a negative value.
And I think I've had experiences with that where I've held on to something beyond its expiry date, and it was really meaningless. What I was hanging on to or what I was trying to hang on to wasn't worth the effort it took to maintain it.
That and too, like I always, when we're talking about something like this, I'm imagining someone with a huge pack on their back and certain things that we need to let go of way more than others. Some things are not so taxing on us, and some things are incredibly weighted. All of that weight that's put onto her back that we're unwilling to let go of is just weighing us down. And that's sort of the metaphor that I see as someone trudging with a big, heavy pack on their back. And then if you were to flip through the contents of what's in the pack, it would be surprising from like an outside perspective to see what someone was actually willing to drag all those miles. Mm-hmm. And then question that person, what is it in this pack that you need to hold on to? And so because it is important to release the load that we put on ourselves, and what would the first step to letting go something be? And identifying what needs to be let go of, which I think that second part is particularly important to address.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first step is you have to know what it is that you're dragging around. What are you hanging on to? And for everybody, it's different. I think it's something you have to kind of take a good observation of your own life. Now, there's all kinds of things that we hang on to, whether it be mental positions or objects, relationships, statuses. There's a myriad of different things that we're hanging on to. And when you look at your life, what is it that you're hanging on to that's holding you back? Or like our desires, when we said, at what cost do our desires tax us? Mm-hmm. Well, you can look at all the things that you're not willing to let go of. At what cost do these things come to your life? Does it take away from your time with your children? Does it take away from actually fulfilling your soul's purpose? Does it keep you up at night and make you tired all day? Like, so, and I think it's a very subjective thing. And a lot of the times the bigger things to let go of have, they're less tangible. And that's, it's concepts in your mind. If you can let go of certain concepts, or say the concept that you need a boat to be happy, you need all these extra things in life. Once you let go of that, you don't create attachments for yourself to let go of. You don't create the physical things for you to let go of. But a lot of the bigger things to let go of really are in the mental plane.
Now, you also mentioned early on in this chapter that there are a lot of subtle quirks that run automatic in your mind. And I've also heard this being said by other people, that the amount of what we do day in, day out is just autonomous, and we're like on autopilot quite often.
That's right.
So can you expand on that a little bit? It's a very interesting point.
Yeah, we have up to 100,000 thoughts a day. And how many thoughts are dropping into your mind? How could you tell me 1,000? For the most part, the brain is running on automatic pilot. Our mannerisms and our behaviors are all kind of sort of just happening. We go from one day to the next, behaving and thinking and doing the same as we behaved and thought and did yesterday. So a conscious life is one that we're aware of all of our actions and our reactions, so that we understand, what our program is, that and what's going on in us that we actually need to let go of. I remember when the Ashayas, told me to watch my mind and look at my thoughts. I thought that was absurd. Like, why would I do that? But when I started cataloging my thoughts and I started looking at my thoughts, I realized that, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on under the radar here. I can't believe I think about this all the time. And that's one of the things I do in my mentoring. When I do mentoring for people, I have 4 to 10 clients a week that come and see me. So that's what I do with them. I talk about cataloging your thoughts.
So when you cataloged your thoughts, even if the thoughts weren't specifically identical, because we talked about a lot of repeating thoughts and et cetera, right? Looping thoughts. But was there also a common theme, even if it wasn't the same thought, that there was a common theme or a root to the thought that you noticed coming up more often than not? There's
collections of thoughts, and depending on, what it is that, your triggers are, your traumas that you've gone through, or the things that you're hanging on to, that's what equates generally what's going on in the mind. So in the first session, I talked about how thoughts, you can't tell me what your next thought's going to be. So that's something that's completely out of your control, but not entirely. So if something is in your consciousness, it's in your ethos around you, then it's going to start coming to you. And that's the thing where thoughts can become powerful in the sense where whatever thoughts we give life to are the ones that start to surround us, and whatever surrounds us will eventually drown us if we keep focusing on the one same thing. And you see how sometimes in business it's consistency and it's longevity, and some of those things really create a momentum in what you're doing. So does thoughts. Like, if you start thinking about certain things and you're bringing new things into your life, then some of these older thoughts, won't cycle through nearly as much.
Just by introducing new thoughts.
By staying alive and fresh with your life and letting go of the things that no longer serve you, you can then start to move into more purposeful endeavors. And, like this podcast that you and I are doing. It's a 14-part series. It's a fairly lofty project that we've taken on. But because we've taken on this, it means that there'll be a whole bunch of things, new things that come into our life.
Mm-hmm.
So in we have to let go of maybe some old things in the process.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing I'm looking to ask is discussing our comfort levels. Now, we've dove into this a little bit in terms of vulnerabilities and those types of things, but how should we, or why should we evaluate our comfort levels?
Well, I'm going to put a different spin on this. A lot of the times you can swap the word comfort with addiction. So, say someone who drinks coffee all the time, you say, well, it's like an old friend. I love drinking coffee. Or if you're smoking, you say it's really soothing. I really enjoy smoking. Mm-hmm. So it's a comfort. But a lot of the times when you really get honest with it, it's really an addiction. So when I would go away to retreats and meditation retreats, this is what taught me about my comforts, is that you would get pulled out of your life, and all the comforts that you would normally have may or may not be at the retreat. You would soon realize how addicted you were to your comforts. So the things that comforted you, maybe in a retreat setting when you couldn't have them, were the things that brought up the most frustration and anger because you couldn't have them. So are they really that comfortable when our habits have become addictions, and when our comforts have turned into addictions? And if you don't, there's a lot of comforts that can downright invoke fears, like and if you don't believe that, hide a smoker's lighter and wait for them to need a cigarette again. Their fear will be right up in your face, like, where's the lighter?
Yeah, it becomes a pressing concern, doesn't it?
Fear and fearless are neighbors. They live directly beside each other.
And the other thing is I'd like to know the incubation cycle for fear, and how long does it take for that to calcify, and how a person's life can be affected if that's left for too long.
Okay, so the classic answer to that question is 21 days to form a habit. Mm-hmm. So, but when it comes to fears, it depends on how deep the fear goes, or how traumatic the event was. Mm-hmm. So if you could fall off the roof once, and then now you've got a really ingrained fear of heights. Mm-hmm. So fears can, when it comes to creating habits in the mind, building neural pathways, they say 21 days, or, there needs to be a certain amount of repetition.
Right.
But if something it's more deeper, and if it's a more traumatic event, how the mind lays down traumatic memories is much different than how it tracks memories of just kind of going for a walk and doing your thing. So in a traumatic event, everything that's happening goes into long-term storage in the mind, and it becomes a little tougher to deal with at that point. And that's what happens with post-traumatic stress, is that these stressful events have locked themselves in the long-term storage in the mind, and they can be really tricky to remove. So fears can calcify very quickly, and so it's important to be on top of your mental health. Your mental health is something that you work on daily, and if fear is becoming a topic in your mind, or if fears are starting to overcome your life, or you're noticing that you're going to fear a lot, I think it's really healthy and important to learn how to set that down, and whether it be through unconditioning yourself in a safe environment, or if it means getting some help in that.
Yeah, something that's coming to mind right now when you say, depending on the severity of the trauma, like we talk about PTSD, that's a term that's oftentimes affiliated with soldiers and stuff like that. But I wonder, like, what's worse? Is it something like an extreme event like that creates trauma within us, or if it's smaller things that don't really show up until years later sometimes, that were small things but just poked away at you consistently, creating a fear over the course of, say, 10 years or something like that. And now it's difficult to trace back the actual root cause of the fear.
When a fear becomes a habit that becomes disempowering in our body, then it can really take a stronghold on your life. And that's the thing with some of our fears, is they start out as just a little fear, but then it becomes a habit to be afraid of something. And then eventually it completely takes over your life because it's disempowering you.
Yeah, it's really sad too when you hear situations where, what you're talking about, where fear really starts to take over your life, and it interferes with, at that point, then it starts to really interfere with the person's forward momentum. Like if they have dreams, or there was things that they really wanted to do, they had aspirations. So it's really important to address why people need to move past their fears and what people can do to begin making small steps towards eliminating them, I think.
I think if you keep a steady practice of staying out of your mind, your fears naturally dissipate. So if you can be mindful in go back to the first session of the first chapter of my book, or the first session of this podcast, and really take in, learning how to step out of your mind and get present with the moment. By doing so, you take control of your life. To be controlled by a voice in your head is a complete utter misuse of the privilege of being born human. It's a privilege to be here, and to be trapped in your mind, being controlled by a voice in your head, really doesn't make a lot of sense, nor is it productive or purposeful in our lives. Can you imagine if there was just like a little speaker that hung from the ceiling, and the speaker told you what to do every moment of the day, and you had to listen to that speaker? Like, wouldn't you resent the person on the other end speaking into the microphone, powering up that speaker? I think you have to get to a point in your life where you realize that the voices in your head are just voices, and for the most part they're not yours, truthful, or even real, and get tired of those voices controlling and running the show.
That's a really great analogy. It's funny, because it's not until you personify something, like you said, a speaker, and that's now an external influence. We all recognize that a speaker hanging from the ceiling, or having someone else tell you you're no good instead of you telling yourself that. It's like when we internalize things in our mind, people do think it's them. It's like it's not as aggravating, in a sense, even, to have your mind telling you what to do, because you think it's you, right? So it's not until that you draw the comparison directly, where we're talking about a speaker hanging from the ceiling that's dictating what and when to do something and what it's going to be, right? Then all of a sudden it feels very intrusive. And I think that everyone would agree that if that's the way your life was, you'd not be good with that.
Yeah, and imagine somebody sitting in the room, and then the speaker, all of a sudden, the voice of their abuser comes over the speaker and says, "You're going to think about me for 3 hours today." And then the person in the room going, "Oh man, I don't want to do that." Like, think about it. That's somebody else's voice will come into your head almost every single day, and then we'll be trapped thinking about that. But the reality is we didn't have to. Nobody's forcing you to have a thought, to think about anything. You can't tell me what your next thought is, but you can say, I'm going to think about this or that. It's totally up to you.
So how people internalize their fears is pretty fascinating to me. And I want to ask you, because this is interesting, because we talk about, we're going to get into how a fear, sometimes to get on the other side of it, doesn't take all that long. It can be actually quite rapid. And so I would like to know how the mind amplifies our fears into something far beyond what is actually reality.
The mind fertilizes and grows the fear. So it's a fear goes in and it's just this tiny little seed, and by time we're done with it, it's like a forest that's multiplied 1,000 times. You know, and fear itself was just this tiny little seed, and it was just a thought. And at the time that of conception and it goes into you, it's just a thought. And then what we do with it is we nurture that thought, and we give it life. We take care of it and treat it like it's our own. And next thing you know, there's a whole forest in our mind, and we can't see the world around us. We're lost in the trees. So it's us that empowers these things. And if you had a thought of fear and then someone said, "Hey, would you like a piece of apple pie?" you might suddenly forget your fear. You know, the mind can just flip over and start thinking about something else.
So let me ask you this then, like if we're talking about a seed that's planted and then over, a period of time, it then evolves and grows into a forest, as you say, is it actually something like where now we have to go in there and start like chopping down tree by tree?
No.
Or is there just something where all of a sudden it ain't there?
No, and it's a matter of changing your relationship to your mind. So that if you no longer give the mind importance, or like the speaker in the room talking to you, if you just ignored it, it wouldn't be a problem anymore. And nor is the mind. And that's one of the things, like we had talked about earlier in our sessions, that I was in the middle of a retreat and I was angry because I was still having these same old self-defeating thoughts. These erroneous thoughts had been tearing at my self-worth for years and years, decades of my life.
Uh-huh.
And I asked my teacher, when is this going to go away? I was mad. I was furious. Like, why does this keep persisting? And he says, they may never go away. So you have to change your relationship to them.
I think I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking about the speaker in the room. That makes the mind a pretty creepy thing, man. If I'm perfectly honest, like reminds me of a space odyssey with Hal. It's just like artificial intelligence is dropping down and it's okay, Ned, it's time. Like, I don't know, when you characterize the mind like that, now all of a sudden it's kind of it's creeped me out a little bit.
And what's really amazing is that most of the world is operating in following the speaker in their mind, and they don't even realize that it's not real. That most of their thoughts are not true, theirs, or real. Just the stuff that we covered in the first session. And what's revealed to a person who overcomes their fears is the present moment. When somebody gets over their fears, they get over the voices in their mind, what they gain is their life. They gain their freedom. They gain joy. They gain purpose, the ability to love beyond the conditions of the mind. They gain an access into the sacred and holiness of this moment that's at hand. They get to see other people in their true forms, not in the way they imagine them to be.
Wow.
So, most of what we look at is conditioned by what we think we're seeing. And when we let go of our fears and we let go of our mind, we see the world in a much different light. Things are revealed to us, and the beauty and the presence and the sacredness of each moment just kind of can take us over.
The evolutionary effect to fear would be worry. And so why is worrying not effective in solving any problems.
Well, worry is as good as fear taking ownership of your body. It's like worrying about a problem is the equivalent of giving someone a glass of water while they're drowning. You know, it does nothing. I've heard parents say, it's my job to worry. Outside of educating your children how to be safe, worry does not help them. You know, and if you think it's your job to worry, I think that we've really taken this too far. We've taken fear too far. You know, worry is toxic in the body, just like fears. Worry disempowers us, and it builds up stress in the nervous system.
Right.
It really does. And over time, you know, we get pretty taxed. We get pretty worn out from our fears and our worries. Like if I stood over you and said, you know, you have this looming project that you know in your mind is due, and I stood over you and said, you know, there's only 4 days and 3 minutes left, and then there's only 4 days and 2 minutes left, you're running out of time, you know, it would just, after a while, you'd be so built up, your anxiety would be going through the roof. And that's sort of what worry does to us. Is it's like picking a scab, and eventually you pick a hole right into yourself with worry.
One of the interesting things about stress is that our minds can create imaginary situations, and then we play them out as if they were real and in the moment.
So do you believe that we live in a more stressful world today than previous generations?
No, I don't, actually. I think we're becoming... There's a few different sides of why I think that way, that we don't live in a more stressful time. And I think there's a few factors here. So the first one, I think we're becoming more sensitive. We're in more tune. We're in greater tune with what's going on in the environment. We know more than we've ever known. So like I could open up my laptop and tell you what's going on the other side of the world.
Right.
You know, we never used to be able to, we didn't know what was going on outside of our town. You know, so now we're over-informed, and we're more sensitive, and this goes for our children too, our youth. You know, the youth we see struggling with anxiety, and you know, and it starts out with just we're stressed, but then the stress turns on itself, and it becomes full-blown anxiety in us. And one of the problems I see is that the younger generation, they're more in tune. They feel their emotions very strongly, and then they also feel other people's emotions. Where maybe 20 years ago, we hardly felt our own, let alone somebody else's emotions.
Right.
And so, you know, kids are saying they don't want to go to school. It's overwhelming. They're overwhelmed by their senses. And so they're not taught how to back up from their feelings. So that's part of why I think it's not that we live in a more stressful time. We've become less emotionally intelligent, but in the process we've become more in tune with our emotions, which makes them even a reason why we need to become more emotionally intelligent.
That's a really good point.
And we're less resilient. You know, we've become in all of our efforts to get through this life unscathed, we've made ourselves a little too comfortable. If you know you always have a soft place to land, one fall could make you fall to pieces. So we need our failings and we need to fall. We need our upsets. We need our heartaches. All of it is necessary in becoming resilient and strong.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. And I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. I mean, The thing that you're talking about too with being overinformed, I have a pretty strong opinion about like propaganda and things that are colored to portray a certain feeling and certain anxieties and stresses about what's going on in the world. Like myself personally, there's parts of the world I may not travel to because, you know, I see on the news about what's going on over there, and then I feel that, you know, that must be true. But this is the thing, we don't even really know like how filtered this information is to make us feel a certain way. So like when we're talking about is today more stressful than it was in previous generations, with information being so readily available to us, and we can't, I don't trust half of what I see. Like I don't know what's real or not real. And so I think a lot of people spend time thinking about that too. Or some people just are lemmings and they take it for what it is. They think, oh yeah, well, it's the news. They're obviously truthful.
See, and that's one thing in my life. The more engulfed I've become in my own life, in pursuing my own purpose, the less time I have to spend watching or fussing over anything outside of my realm of influence. So my what's important to me now is that I project the most love into my circle or realm of influence. And I know where my realm of influence is because it's standing right in front of me. From one moment to the next, my circle of realm of influence is every person I meet, every place, everywhere I go. So that's where my circle of influence is. The problems that China is facing is not in my realm of influence. There's nothing I can do about that. And am I less informed? Maybe a little bit, but I feel like stewing over the world's problems doesn't create solutions. You know, and I don't know how many times people have fixated on the world's problems, and for what happened at the end of the session, at the end of the your complaints and your oh, look at this and look at that and look at this. It's just your ego dramatizing over dramatic events, because the ego loves nothing more than drama. It loves to wallow in fear, because we've been moving into fear for several generations. We've become more and more fearful of a society, where I never saw antibacterial anything when I was growing up. We all had cast iron stomachs and we got sick because it was good for us. And so we just, I don't know. I don't buy into this fear generation, and I think when we sit around and we fixate on fearful things, how detrimental that is to our circle of influence, which is right in front of us always. And by embracing my empowerment and moving more and more into love and letting go of all the things that are no longer serving me in my life, my circle of influence is getting bigger and bigger. I'm affecting more and more people. And if we all grabbed our empowerment and really went for the most purposeful life that was meant for you, your circle of influence gets bigger. You think about, this podcast that you started, your circle of influence has grown considerably. Now you're here today. We're projecting something loving and positive, and it's going to make an influence in the world.
Yeah, that truer words have never been spoken, man. That's just it. I do see a lot of things that are out, especially with social media, where you kind of get these social justice warriors that will post a video about something that's going on in the world, and then they put in their 2 cents, and then a whole bunch of people just feed on it for a minute. It's really bizarre to me, and I don't really know 100%. Like I just wonder if like you said, that's the ego. So is that people just wanting to be seen as a person who cares, but aren't really doing anything?
Well, they have a term for it. I think in the East Coast, it's called kitchen bitching.
Kitchen bitching.
Where you all sit around the kitchen and just start bitching.
That's funny, man. So getting back to stress here, obviously there's good stress and bad stress. I mean, stress is what gets you out of bed in the morning because you feel like, well, I need to get doing some stuff, and
Yep.
So we need to differentiate between good and bad stress. So what are some tips that you have for us on that?
Okay. So I guess you ask yourself, what am I doing here? Is this good for me? And it's important part of becoming empowered is to know whether the stresses in your life are healthy and productive for you.
Uh-huh.
I do this all the time. I ask myself, and I wait for the knowingness inside of me to arise with the answer. The secret is to stop talking to ourselves long enough to hear the answer. When you ask yourself, is this kind of stress worth it to me? And we have to pause ourselves long enough to really get that answer.
Right.
A friend of mine, he lives his life quite like that. He asks himself, if I say, Dan, you wanna meet up and hang out on the 20th of this month? It's a Saturday. He'd be like, he'd have to ask himself. He would truly ask himself. He'd come up with that answer from within. He wouldn't use his mind to answer me, and he wouldn't allow himself to do things that would just put more stress in his life. And I think that's something that a technique that we all need to employ a little bit is what I'm doing worth the stress that it's causing?
Getting back to desires, for an example, things that you feel you need to have and at what cost. I think stress is probably one of the biggest debts to that cost. Like, a lot of people think when you say at what cost, I wonder how many people's minds immediately go to money. How much money does it cost? But no, I feel like the cost besides money is really the bigger picture. And I feel like some of the things that we may want in life produce situations that then incur stress. And now that seems to be a large cost, I think, for a lot of people when they're chasing things that they don't necessarily need or even really want. Once it's there in front of them, and like we talked about, you give it 2 or 3 weeks, your honeymoon phase with that new thing is over with.
Yeah.
Now, how do you feel? Because the feeling to attain is usually the best part, besides obviously actually the day you get it, the first time you wash that car.
Yeah.
Once it gets a little scratching or bird shits on it, well, all right, whatever. That's been my experience with it, man.
And a lot of things are not worth the stress they create.
Yeah. So here's another interesting thing, and we're gonna dip into a juicy subject here: the social media and just the smartphones, and sort of how that takes time away from us. Okay, so I want to quote a statistic actually, real quick here. This is a statistic that you presented in your book. So the average person spends up to 4 hours a day looking at their smartphone. That is 1,456 hours per year. Let's just pause for a moment and think about that for a moment. That's unbelievable, okay? But anyways, I'll continue. So if we are awake for 16 hours, we are spending a quarter of the day looking at our phone. Again, it's not until you add up the time and you actually say the words out loud that you realize the weight and the impact to those statistics. That's incredible. So shortly after that statistic is revealed, you say the following: it is important to give yourself over to fruitful endeavors. So what I'd like to ask you, Ned, in your opinion, what are the drawbacks to wasting time with activities that don't yield a net positive result to us?
It really takes away from your ability to be healthy and productive in your life. There's, in the smartphone topic, there's very little that's produced in moving your thumb up a screen, constantly scrolling on the screen of our phone. And yet, I myself, I've done lots of it, lots of scrolling, and
myself included.
I tend to use social media as a way to project a positive message on a daily basis. But these fruitful, unfruitful adventures we go on in life, sometimes they're necessary, and sometimes we learn a great deal of things that don't yield a high reward, but they got us out in the world, and they put us in contact with different people. We learn things. So things don't always have to be fruitful. I've had more fails in life than I've had wins. And life isn't about winning or failing. It's about experiencing and getting to know the true self. So I think it's just important to ask yourself, and this is where nobody knows what's right or good for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we live in a time that there's a certain amount of society that is trapped in this paradigm in their mind, that there's professionals out there that know what's right for them. And it's just not true. You know what's best for you. And I think when you learn how to dig in a little deeper than the surface of your mind, you can have an instant live feed on telling you what's best for you. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, ask yourself, does this thing that I'm doing, does it bear fruit in my life? And is it important for me to keep doing this? Uh-huh. Be your own guide in life. You have to be your own tour guide in life.
Yeah.
Nobody has time to take your hand and drag you around.
Mm.
So you have to be the one that looks objectively at what you're doing.
I think there's like two sides to this coin when it comes to how much time we spend on our phones, because just as a matter of comparison, I feel like our phones are a tool just like our mind is. Very, very similar in that sense and regard, that you can achieve quite a lot through your phone if you use it practically, and that there's an actual objective to what you're trying to accomplish with it. Like you had said earlier, you use it to project a positive message or a quote for each day. That's great. If people read that and helps their day, then that's fantastic. You just managed to affect a handful of people, or quite a few people, in fact, and with very little input on your end. Like there's actually it's not like you have to call 100 different people and say the same thing over and over to them. And then of course too, and this is a lot of the Drum Gab listeners will understand this very well, but there's a lot of people online that use their phones and social media to create brands and brand awareness. And because a lot of business takes place on the internet, it's a great way to market things. I mean, in fact, this podcast will be using social media as an avenue to promote it, so that people have awareness about it, so that they know it exists. It's a very efficient method in getting out a message. But here's the problem. And I've experienced this firsthand. I know this because when I develop my network of people that I now speak with, and whenever something happens, I put it on a podcast and I can let people know about it. You can easily develop a habit. You said this now a few times, 21 days. Well, 21 days is nothing, really, in this grand scheme of things. Not to mention that, but the chemical response, the things that happen when we consume social media, and we're getting likes, and we're actually noticing more and more traction. That traction is a sign of progression. So therefore, then we start to think, okay, well, I'm doing the right thing. I need to keep doing this because everything seems to be growing. And maybe I'm getting more downloads on my podcast, or I'm exchanging with people I just never thought was possible. And this has all happened to me. I'm in contact personally with people that I could not have been if it weren't for social media. And that is an actual fact. But here's the thing. it's easy to become very addicted to this thing as you're getting like all the juice from it, you know? And then the next thing you know is you can't get off of it. And you've now created yourself a habit. And it could be like a year later when you're looking at your phone and, man, I'm on this thing all the time. And like 40% of my time on it, I'm not doing anything. And a lot of people who are social media influencers that I know have pulled away from it because they've noticed that they've become more mindless with it than tactical and objective with it. And I think that that's an interesting thing because some people have made businesses out of social media and their phones. They're literally running a business through their phone. And that could be considered a fruitful endeavor that, you know, because it's actually providing them with income. But the thing is we need to employ a balance. There needs to be a balance to this. You need to set yourself guidelines because what if you, just as an example, say you're at Niagara Falls or something and you're on the Maid in the Mist and something really great happens and you're with your family and the moment the cool thing happened, you were looking at a post and you missed it. No pun intended. You you need to put that thing away from time to time and really like exist in the moment like we've been talking about so often here. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I just wanted to remind some people of.
Yeah, good point.
Now the other thing is instant gratification. I love this topic. This is a very common issue amongst our current society. There's a lot of people that have no patience, man. They expect everything to happen very quickly. So I want to ask you how patience is crucial in balancing a healthy outlook on our goals and how we manage our day and monitor our expectations.
Mm-hmm. Well, long-term rewards or delayed rewards have always been a concept that I work well with. So, and I think any successful person or anyone who's mastered anything understands the concept of delayed reward. So, you know, you being a professional drummer, you understand the concept of that's a pretty delayed reward. You didn't get to where you are overnight. And so patience, you know, it's easier mastered once you set your mind down. If your mind didn't interfere, you wouldn't have any problem with patience at all. So patience, you know, sometimes it's the ability to set our mind down, or it's the ability to hold steadfast to an end goal. You know, with faith that you're making progress. The thing about life is that, you know, and I remember I got up in front of a group of kids one time at the CMHA. I was giving a talk there, and these kids wanted to know what it takes to be an artist. And I said, patience and persistence. There's more sideways movement in your career than there'll ever be forward. Mm-hmm. So understanding, you know, life is moving sometimes sideways for longer periods than it will ever move forward. And I used to watch my artists. They would start out tattooing and they'd get to a certain level, and then they'd plateau for a while. Mm-hmm. And they'd find that they weren't moving forward. And so the thing that I would teach them is I'd try to tell them, you know, the more devoted you are, the faster things will move in your life. Mm-hmm. And that's true. If you're an impatient person, learn how to be committed and devoted to the moment at hand. And you'll find that the things that you're wanting to bring in front of you will actually come at an exponential rate the more devoted you are to your path.
That's great advice. This is just to tickle the drum community for a moment. There's a lot of this talk. Actually, Jared Falk talks about this quite often, is nothing that is a great reward or once you become skilled at something is ever easy. And it takes time. It's like, who wants to be the best person at watching Netflix? You know, like that's easy to do. Like there's no skill involved to that. So like with anything that's difficult and a challenge, the reward is going to be much larger, but you also have to expect that it's going to take a lot of time.
That's right.
And not to mention that, but there is like micro steps to get there. So like, you'll hit these little milestones where it's like, say with drumming again, oh, now I know how to do this thing. I know how to do this pattern. Well, that's one thing. You're never looking at like, I want to be Dave Weckl, one of the greatest drummers alive. You're thinking, this is where I am. And then hopefully in a week, I'm better than I was this week. And just keep yourself in check with that, so that you're never like looking too far in the distance. You have to like very much keep yourself right in like 5 feet in front of you. It's like with this podcast, for an example, like I always just kind of looked at my feet and kept moving them. Mm-hmm. And then you look up and you're like, oh, wow, look where I am now. This is kind of neat. Mm-hmm. I haven't looked up in a while. I think that's important, just to keep your head down and keep working. Mm-hmm. and focus on what it is that you want to get good at little by little, and just chip away at it.
And by putting as much devotion into whatever it is you're doing in your life, when you start to pour love into what it is you're doing, mm-hmm. you'll see there's so many gratifications that will come from that. It will bring so many things for you that can be very humbling and cause you to feel humility, gratitude, reverence. So that's the thing about love, is when you pour it into something, it becomes grand.
That and also add this to it as well, as I think that by adding devotion into whatever it is that you do is what helps you survive the length of the journey. Mm-hmm. That's what separates the wheat from the chaff, I think, is that if you're really not loving it, the length of time in which you have to pour effort into something, you're just not going to see the end result, because it takes a very, very long time. And the way that the world is sort of structured now, where things seemingly happen so fast, and you'll have like certain people who says, oh, learn how you can make $100,000 in 90 days. It's like, I don't know, man. People need a reality check with that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. and stop fantasizing. So another thing I'd like to ask you is, how do we learn tolerance, and how does intolerance lead to more problems within us?
Well, I think my book answers this very clearly. What I wrote in my book about tolerance is, I was going to share that with you. So, tolerance can help when you feel that life is out of control, or that you need to control what is happening. Your need to control only briefly satiates your ego, so with tolerance, you'll find and accept the humanity in others. Mm-hmm. That's a big statement there. With tolerance, you'll find and accept the humanity in others. I think that's an important point. Mm-hmm. You open the door for deeper and often unexpected experiences to unfold. These experiences are often positive in nature. Tolerance is just the right button to push when you feel you've had enough. Intolerance only gives you more to let go of inside your mind and prevents you from moving toward your ultimate peace. Whereas learning tolerance lets you and others live amicably while inviting equanimity, especially in the midst of difficult situations. Intolerance feeds selfishness and leads you to believe that you need more than your share. Mm-hmm. It also forces you to see through a narrow line of vision. True tolerance is not just a willingness to tolerate another. It's found in your ability to respect other people's differences, their beliefs, the way they express themselves, and the choices they make. However, that does not mean that you should be passive. Taking a stand and finding your own voice when you need it is not intolerant. Often the hardest things to say hold the most truth. Tolerance will simply help you get your point across respectfully. This will call others to attention when you speak, but if you're able to truly embrace tolerance. And I think there's been some really great leaders that have come through. Nelson Mandela rings a bell, just off the top of my mind, where he talked about, tolerance and, the equality of other people. Mm-hmm. So tolerance is when you're a person who embraces tolerance and you learn how to live and be tolerant with things, it people afford you a little bit more respect, because it's a very admirable trait to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, my big question with that, though, is if there's a way to balance a respectable level of assertiveness, because you mentioned even in that you don't want to be passive.
That's right.
But how can we maintain that level of assertiveness that we need to be respected, but also be tolerant?
Well, I think it's a matter of self-awareness and maintaining a willingness to love. Mm-hmm. With these two things, we know when it's time to act or to speak, or when not to speak. One of my favorite quotes I wrote is, "Speaking our truth sometimes requires no words at all." So being assertive sometimes means to not say anything at all.
That's funny.
Letting go is like dumping a rock out of your shoe. You stop, let it go, and then keep walking without looking back. Your hidden power waits for you under all the things you need to let go of.
With all of what we've just talked about, that's quite a lot of content there, but let's get back to the question of how do we let go?
Well, I guess I just throw it back to you. How do we not let go? Is it not tiring to hang on to everything? Mm-hmm. I think it tires me out, just the thought of all the things that I needed to hang on to. And my life felt like I was pushing the ball uphill all the time. Mm-hmm. I remember watching this movie with Thomas Keating in it, A Rising Tide of Silence. And Thomas had this dream that he was putting wallpaper up, and then as fast as he could put it up, it was peeling back off. And he was crying in the dream, and he felt like he was pushing the ball uphill, basically. Mm-hmm. And I could relate to that. Like, there was a good portion of my life that in my need to control and my unwillingness to let go, it just felt like I was constantly pushing a ball uphill. Where can you just all of a sudden release your need to control? What can you let go of? You'd be surprised how many things that you can let go of and nothing changes other than your position.
Yeah.
There's so much going on that we think we need to control, but our control does very little at the end of the day. And how much you can control, is just you have a slim influence. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think that's true, become somebody's boss. And you'll learn right away there's very little you can do to control another person.
Right. Yes, and it's part of this too is learning acceptance and having that be part of your life as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we keep coming back to this acceptance, and this concept is, it's not defeatism. As we discussed in it, there is a lot of things that we don't need to claim ownership of. And things that weight us down as people and really prevent us. It's like walking directly into wind that's heavy wind. Like we want to have the gust on our back instead of our face. And I think that the more, like we're talking about, the more that you let go, the more that you accept the things that we cannot change, or people we cannot change, or circumstances we can't change, it's better just to accept them and let them go, right?
That's right.
So what are some of the mental and spiritual rewards for letting go?
Well, the mental is that we have less stress, and we're not so tired. And the spiritual that's an easy answer. We open up a space for peace to arise in. So it's peace. It takes a great deal of effort to hang on to all these things. And sometimes it's a matter of, you can hold things in your life, and it's a matter of holding it with or without attachment.
Right.
So now I remember somebody asked, I was talking about this one day with one of my clients, and they said, what do you mean by no attachment? And I said, well, think of it this way. If you, I asked him to put out his hand, and I put a stone in his hand. And I said, now close your hand. So he's holding the stone. I said, now turn your hand upside down so your palm's facing the ground. And he says, okay. So he's got the stone in his hand. I said, if you let go, you're going to drop the stone. Right? He says, yeah. I said, so it takes a certain amount of effort to hold that stone. I said, that's attachment. Turn your hand over and open it up. And I said, the stone's not going to fall. Right? He turns his hand over, and he opens up, and there's a stone sitting there. That's non-attachment. And so that's a metaphor how we can hold things in our life. We can hold things with attachment, and we can cling on to it. It's like we're pushing it uphill. Or we can hold our life events with no attachment. And no attachment means that sometimes we let go of the outcome of how we think things are going to turn out. Right. No attachment means that we learn how to be present in all of our endeavors. And with no attachment, we enjoy each step of the way. Because it's not that life is meant to be happy and extremely joyful in every second of the day, but joy is the heart's way of saying thank you for following it.
Wow.
And that's the difference between attachment and non-attachment, and the rewards of letting go.
What a great way to sum that up. That's just incredible. And that wasn't mentioned in your book, I don't believe, was it?
No, that's just other things that I didn't roll into it.
Yeah, it's such a simple way to observe something. There was something in the book. As I was reading it, there's a lot of words in the book. The book is 60,000 words. And yet there are 5 words within the book that it might as well have been in bold and 10 point sizes larger than the rest of the text I was reading. But this is just an amazing perspective. I hope when people hear this that they'll get something out of this. But if we think about our traumas in life, that they're happening for you and not to you, that is just enormous to think of it that way, because there is growth through trauma. Like we were talking about this last night, just casually. There aren't many people that we can think of that did really great things that didn't have some trauma in their life. Even great comedians had horrible childhoods, most of them, and that's where they developed their great sense of humor from. So how and why must people look at their misfortune and traumas as an opportunity for growth?
Well, first I want to share with you who taught me that. It was one of my many, many great teachers that have showed up in my life. My friend Susan Weisberger. She taught me about that. She's a psychic who lives in Sedona, Arizona. My wife and I met her by chance when we were there on our honeymoon. And what she brought this wisdom into my life, and it's been such a blessing. It's been a real game changer for me. And what I've learned from this wisdom is the thing that you said. My life is happening for me versus to me. What it does is it takes the victim out of the scenario.
Yeah.
This simple shift in mindset allows us to extract the lessons out of what's going on in life versus being stuck in the sad story about being harmed, and the thing that pulls us back to stay or live in that trauma or drama that's unfolded in your life.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those beautiful simplicities where you read it, you immediately understand this like a lot that it starts to paint in your mind, like your picture it starts to paint is massive, because then you start flipping through the Rolodex of things that have happened to you in your life, and you start thinking, man, maybe that if I shift those 2 words from 2 to 4 makes such an enormous difference. And all of a sudden you can see the value in everything, whether it's bad, or extremely bad or a positive thing. That is huge. I when I read that was one of those things. There's some things in this book that I could like catch a glimpse of like the depth of what it's talking about. And I could see, okay, there's a lot more there to really get into, but that was one of those immediate face value. Like it slapped me across the face when I read that. It's impossible not to interpret that. And like I said, I personalized with it really quickly, as all of my personal experiences through my own life. And I love that. That's just one of the greatest things, man. That's just so cool. So, I mean, this is the thing. So once we have let go, though, I mean, is there a chance that it can resurface again?
Yes, and they generally do. So I think that's something you want to be prepared for is again, like what I was talking about earlier, about changing your relationship to all the things in your mind. When something comes up that you need to let go of, just stay willing to keep letting go until it becomes effortless or it no longer arises in you.
Yeah, it's just rinse and repeat, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because it can't be expected that some of the burdens and the things that people hold on to are pretty significant. You can't expect them to be resolved in an afternoon of contemplation or a simple mind shift. I mean, that this is a practice, and everybody who's listening, this is a practice, and don't have your expectations to think that this sort of thing is going to change immediately for you. This is going to take some time and some devotion as well to start seeing any kind of result. I know I've talked to you about this before quite a few times, because just so the listeners understand, like Ned and I, we've been corresponding daily for about a month at this point, and I'll share experiences with him, like things that how I used to handle a situation and how things have changed with me, my overall level of tolerance and patience and understanding. And there's a lot. And, with my relationship with my wife as well, and my friends and my son, everything, there have been enough affirmations for me to feel convinced that this is finally something that is going to be something I can now use and follow for the rest of my life, so that I can continue to grow in these concepts and discover more about myself. And there's a lot of answers. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. This stuff is really legit, and it is real. And this whole subject of letting go, when I was reading the book, it was something that I found to be quite profound, because it's something that I identify with really, really closely.
Letting go takes a hero's heart, for the mind can replay your traumas and dramas for your entire life.
So with that being said, Ned, I mean, is there a profound moment where you became a witness to an event unfolding in front of you?
Yeah. I told there's a story I tell in chapter 5 of my book, and it was labeled "Panic in the Park." Mm-hmm. And I was helping a friend in a drum booth.
Of all things.
Of all things. He made hand drums and was selling them at the Sunfest in London. And when the one day I could hear this little girl screaming, "Help, help." And I look out into the crowd, and there's a lady lying on the ground crying. And she's shaking. And so this little girl's just yelling for people, "Help, please help my mom." And so I went running over there, and I could tell right away, my heart knew this lady's just freaking out. She's having an anxiety attack. I don't know why or how I knew that, but my heart knew.
Mm-hmm.
So I grabbed the little girl. I says, come and lay down with your mom. And I had the little girl lay in front of her mom, and and facing her and hugging her. And then I laid down behind her mom and I lay down on the ground and I started hugging her. And I whispered in her ear, it's okay, you're safe. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're fine. You're going to be okay. And then and I told her in the moment, I think I told her I loved her too. I said, I love you, and within a few minutes she calmed down and the situation subsided and she was okay. She was just having a panic attack. But it was one of those moments in my life where it was so surreal. Like, what just happened there? Like, I was shocked that nobody in the crowd stopped and helped this poor little girl trying to get her mom help.
Right.
But in psychology, they call it responsibility difference. If it's harder to get help in a crowd than it would be if one person's there. So
yeah, man, that's
and I witnessed that firsthand, how there was such a difference in responsibility, but what happened next was the next day the lady came back to the drum booth, and she had a painting that she did for me, and she gave me the painting, and her inner eyes there were tears of joy, and I cried with her, and she thanked me, and that's maybe all that was said. And I don't even know if she even said it verbally, but the moment that had unfolded that day was just profound.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good story for this topic, because in that moment when she was having that anxiety attack, she was hanging on to it, but as soon as she felt safe, she let go. And I think that's something that we have to realize is that we need to drop our fears and realize that we're going to be okay, and that you're safe, and we can let go. And when we let go, there's a peace that automatically opens up to us.
So for creatives, this is being that you're a tattoo artist, you have a lot of experience with creating things artistically, and I wonder, explain the concept of letting go during the process of creating something, Ned.
Okay, switch gears. This is a topic that we really dive into in when we get to session 12.
Yeah, this is just a precursor.
Really excited about.
Yeah.
Okay, so in my book, I talked about creation and how things come into form. My experience as a tattoo artist, and I've been tattooing for 25 years, is when I first started tattooing, I watched many new tattooers, because I trained 5 tattooers, and I'd watch them do their first 100 tattoos, and they'd be squeezing the grip, almost like they're trying to squeeze the tattoo out of the steel tube.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell them, I'd say, just let go, just relax. And it wasn't until the artist could really let go that you would start to see flow and movement show up in their work. And what flow and movement is in a tattoo is life, basically. Tattoos that have a lot of nice flow and movement, almost have like a life to them. And it pulls the eye through the piece, and it moves you through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And every line is like, it's just like it's been licked into the skin ever so gently. So letting go in the act of creation is one of the more important parts to being a creator. Because the truth about creation is that we're just co-creators in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a witness to what's happening. And if you've ever been in the zone, or in the silence, or in the pocket, whatever you want to call that thing is, when you lose your mind and the presence of the moment gets so big that you lose track of time and space. If you've ever been there, you'll know that you were not hanging on to anything in that moment. You were simply letting go.
Letting go readies us for the gift of peace to arise in us. It's not that you obtain peace, it's more like you surrender to it within and allow it to gift you with a visit.